starting a new campaign can be very, very exciting, but it's also kind of insane and overwhelming and terrifying. And if you're anything like me, you think that you have everything prepared, that you might just need a few NPCs and maybe just write a cool opening scene, and then suddenly you're 6 hours deep into custom calendars and thinking about faction politics. So today I want to slow things down and walk you through everything that I actually do before session 1 of a brand new campaign. Now, the first thing I do is establish the setting. And when I say that, what I mean is you want to try to keep it local. You want to think about the immediate area where your players are going to be. So obviously you should know your world, but you don't need to traverse 4,000 miles in a campaign. And I highly recommend that you don't do that for a lot of different reasons. But I think that it's 100% possible to have an entire campaign setting in just like a 50-mile radius. If you think about your town right now, if you were to drop a pin on the map and put it out for a 50-mile radius, how many different points of interest would there be within that little pin? And that's just 50 miles, right? You don't need to have a massive map for your players to feel like they're going through something. If anything, I feel like it makes your world feel less real by doing that, because you're just trying to push them through setting after setting and move them through different biomes, if you will. But I think that having a more fleshed out local area is going to help establish your setting even better, because those are the things that are going to make a community feel more connected when they're not talking about a kingdom, 2 countries over, or an invading force. They're talking about their neighbors or the person in the farm down the road, because that's going to be the more realistic thing for them to talk about. Now, the second thing that I think, and by the way, I'm doing this in order of what I think is the progression of how I sort of knock things out. So the first thing I do is establish the setting. The very next thing I would do is to start building characters with the players and building their backstories. And the thing to note here is that some players are going to give you a lot and some players are going to give you nothing. And that's okay, because having that freedom for some players means that you have a lot of room to work into a connected story rather than trying to make 8 different stories fit into one thread, if that makes sense. So build your characters with your players, ask them if there's anything that they want to include in their backstories, ask them if there's anything that they're dying to include, or if there are things that they don't want to know. If they have a loved one that disappeared when they were young, they may not want to know if that character is alive or not, right? So having a list of what you do know about your characters and their backstories gives you a better understanding of what still needs filling in. And that sort of leads us into the third step for me, which is figuring out the end. Because once I know the characters, once I've done that with the players and I've built up their backstories, then the next thing I want to do is, okay, well, where is all of this going to lead? And by that, I mean, where do I see it leading? Where would I like it to lead? But leaving the room to know that all of that is going to change by the end. And when you're figuring out the quote unquote end, you can use 1 or 2 of the backstories to tie 1 or 2 of them to a bad guy. It can be a minor bad guy to just sort of give them something to pull on early into the sessions, or you can tie them to the BBEG, right? The big bad evil guy. One of the characters could be their prodigal son, or could be a long lost relative of a demon lord, right? It's completely okay to have that. And it's okay to not have that. If you don't want to tie your characters' backstories into anything and you want to keep it separate from the main storyline, that's okay too. I think that that's going to lead to more sessions ultimately, which may or may not be what you want. But once you have an idea for what the end is, then the fourth step for me is to set up my flowchart of moments and beats. And again, this is 100% going to change, but I like to have a sort of breakdown of what my players may or may not do. And it can be as simple as, if they take the left path, this is what happens. And if they take the right path, this is what happens. And it can be as complicated as having a 10-step flowchart where they have multiple different threads they can pull on, where they have multiple different quests, they have different people they could talk to, there's a side quest that they forgot, and then they also have a chase sequence coming up, and I have 2 encounters planned at some point. It's okay to have it be complicated like that too. The ultimate thing here is that you want to figure out what your system is for understanding where the story is and understanding the best places to drop those emotional moments if that's the type of storytelling you like. But for me, once I have that figured out, once I know where the story is taking place, and I mean specifically what town, what city, what country, once I know those basic things about my world and where the campaign is going to go, then I'll build the characters, build their backstories, figure out where I have some loose ends that I can pull on. Then I'll think about what kind of story I want to tell, right? Figuring out the end and what that means. And that's also where I'm sort of figuring out if I want this to be demons or devils or ghosts or, alien eldritch beings, is when I'm figuring figuring out the end because I kind of want to know who the main villain is going to be for this campaign, right? Then I set up the flowchart, and that can be, again, very simple. And for me, that's here's where the players are going to start. Here is the end and what that climactic moment I think is going to be. And then I have all of this room in between that could span 100 sessions. It could span 500 sessions, but I want to start plotting out some of those moments. So that's where we go into number 5, which is determining goals and challenges for your characters. The best way to go from point A to point B is through character growth. So once I know the character, once I know their backstory, then I want to figure out, well, how can I challenge them? And how can I figure out the best way to help them grow? And the big thing here is that growth is done through failure and loss and pain. And I think that that is the biggest way to get your players to like their characters, to feel like they're connected to their characters, and to ultimately feel the pain if those characters die, is because they feel like they've invested something more than just time. It's not just time at the table, it's emotional time that they've put into the characters on the back end because they're role-playing that growth throughout the campaign. So that's sort of step 5, is determining the goals and challenges for the character. And the way to do that is just ask yourself, what are their flaws? And ultimately for me, the real questions I ask are, what does the character want? What does the character need? Because that's not always the same thing, right? I always go back to the same example that a drug addict might want the drugs, but what they need is to get clean, right? So those are two different things that are in conflict with each other, which is what helps make some really good role playing. Once you know what they want and what they need, then you ask yourself, what are their fears? And when you have those 3 things, you can set up a slew of challenges for them, because all you need to figure out is, well, what is the thing that is going to be in direct conflict with what their wants and goals and fears are. So in the example of the drug addict, you can set up some challenges where maybe somebody tries to sell them some drugs, and then they have the moment where they get to role play that sort of like, oh no, I want this. How do I deal with this? And I think that's a great way to challenge your characters, because eventually you're going to get to the moment where they say, I don't need this anymore. I don't want the drugs or whatever it is. Don't sell me the catnip. And that will be the real moment of growth. And so those are those moments that we're looking for to plot between the beginning of the campaign and the end of the campaign. Those are those things that we want to see and build out and draw out. Once I have that, then I'll start to build the first milestones, because now that I know what goals and challenges I'm going to be giving to each player, mind you, then I just need to figure out where I'm going to start plopping that in. And all this means is that from session to session, all you really know is that you don't need to know what the end is for your session, because that could be, again, 100, 500,000 sessions down the line. But what you do know is that you are at point A and you need to go to point B, or you're at point D in the campaign and you need to go to point E. Having a direction for the campaign is the best thing that you can have. It doesn't matter how prepared you are. It doesn't matter how good you are at taking notes. If you don't know the direction of your campaign, it's going to feel very, very boring. You can't leave all of that to your players, because your job as the dungeon master is to help guide the story, guide the narrative. And your players will then decide what to do with that guidance, and you react to that, right? But if you just go to your session with what do you guys want to do? I promise you, you're at least one day going to have a session where everybody is going to look around the table and absolutely nobody is going to speak up. And it is very disheartening as a DM when you realize, oh shit, they're not engaged. So build those milestones so that you have an idea of where you're going. But on top of that, those milestones serve as your emotional beats. So there could be 100 sessions between milestone A and milestone B, but at least by the time you get to milestone B, one of the characters is no longer the same as they were, or the world is no longer the same as it was, or the story has gone in a different direction. The whole point is to just keep things going up and down, fun to dangerous, fun to scary. You want it to just keep going up and down, following that emotional roller coaster. And as you get farther and farther into the story, each crescendo up becomes more and more intense until you build to that final boss fight that becomes the finale and the climax of your campaign. Now, here's the part where I'd like to say I sit down and write immersive, eloquent prose to kick off my campaign, like the intro to a fantasy novel, but let's be real, I am not Tolkien. I really, really wish I was. I am just a tired, amorphous elder god thing. Demigod? I got more of a demigod. I don't know, it's been a long time. But I'm tired, I'm behind, and if I try to describe a foggy harbor at dusk, it always ends up turning into like a foggy Taco Bell parking lot. So that's why I use Describe. Now, what's cool about Describe is that it's this tool that I rely on that can help turn my scattered, sort of sleep-deprived notes into these very vivid, atmospheric scene descriptions that they just kind of have available to you. So you just type in foggy harbor and boom, 2 paragraphs of beautifully written text that actually feels like it's fantasy. So there's no filler. It's just these amazing handcrafted, like these are descriptions that are handcrafted by real writers. Like, let me just put that out there. And if you don't want to do that, if you feel like that's cheating, which it's not, you don't have to do that. You can just write the notes yourself. But if you do want to use it, it's just like using a ghostwriter. So you can then focus on the story, on your characters, and panicking behind the DM screen whenever your players skip the harbor entirely and sail to the cursed island that you haven't prepped yet. Because why not? So anyways, if you want your players to feel like they're there, whether that's a haunted cathedral or a harbor or that weird island that you haven't prepped, go check out Describe, because that stuff is already there for you and it makes your life easier, I promise. And there's a lot of things that you can check out for free. So give it a shot before your next campaign and your future self will thank you. Use my code FANTASYFORGE at checkout and you're welcome. Now, number 7 is to figure out a tone and write the intro or the bullets for what I will be saying in the first session. And when I'm talking about tone, I'm talking about, is this sci-fi? Is this a gritty realism? Is this a Western? Is it high fantasy? Figure out what colors, what images, what stories come to mind when you think about it. Find inspiration from shows and from movies, things that you want to try and bring to life that have inspired you in your own way, right? So once you know the tone, then you can sort of write your intro, write your bullets down. And this is where I start thinking about, well, what's the best way to introduce the location? Is it through just reading a couple of paragraphs so that they get some basic info? For me, that's not the way it is. I don't like that sort of approach because I think it can get very boring to have players just listen to you read. It's one of the main reasons why I don't like running adventure modules a lot. It just doesn't have the same sort of emphasis because I guess ultimately by reading it, I just feel disconnected from it and I don't feel like I'm actually invested. And I think for me, in order to be a good DM, I need to be invested. And the best way for me to be invested is to build the setting up myself. I realize that I'm thinking too much about what I'm reading and not necessarily about what I'm supposed to be getting from the reading, if that makes sense. I just don't tune in. The adventures just don't sink in for me. So I like to write them myself. That's little information about me that you didn't ask for. So write the bullets for your intro or the paragraphs, right? Whatever that means for you. But for me, I'll write some bullets. I'll want to make sure that I talk about the floating pyramid. I make sure that I want to talk about the cold winters and how the fog and the green, massive evergreen trees feel and look outside the city walls. If I want to make sure that they know that the city is an ancient city, then I'll talk about things that make it feel ancient, like the crumbling walls or the half of the city that's built inside the original wall that feels older than the city built outside the original wall that is more modern and new. So figure out what that means to you. Figure out what things you want to make sure that you touch on and write those in. Start with bullets and turn it into a paragraph if that's what you need, but write down the things that you want to make sure that you hit in the first session and some quick ways for you to think about how to capture a tone. Like, how do you capture a sci-fi tone? Well, lots of neon. Maybe you might put in floating cars and metal prosthetics. If you want to capture a high fantasy tone, well, how do you do that? You might start in a tavern as part of the trope, right? Make sure that you include an elf and that somebody does magic. Figure out what things you want to have happen and what things you want to get across. Write them down. I promise you it'll help you in your first session. Now, number 8 is to do all of the setup. And by that, I mean very simply setting up the music, making the maps, taking some notes for myself, right? Writing those bullets, creating the monster tokens. That's one of the last things I do. It honestly might just do it the day before or the day of if I'm really busy. But when I'm getting closer to the first session is when I'm doing all of that stuff. None of that setup happens until I know the story, or at least up to that point, up to session 1, right? And then ultimately the last thing, and I think the most important thing that you can put on this list is your session 0. I do not have session 1 without having session 0 for a lot of different reasons. If you found a group on Reddit and you posted on LFG and you're trying to get a group together, if you don't have a session 0, you may very well come to regret it because you don't know these people and you may not mesh with all of them. So the first thing I'll do is have a session 0. I'll host a one-shot that might give some background on some of the history of the world or some context that they might need in order to go into the new campaign. But that session 0 is also sort of like an interview for me. If I don't like the energy that I'm getting from somebody, if I realize that somebody's being a bigot or something like that, then I just don't want them at my table. If they're just not a good fit for my table, that is a great opportunity to just sort of cut that before it ever starts because you've had a session 0. The other thing that's important about session 0 is that this is a great opportunity for you to sit down, set expectations, and talk to your players about what you should or should not include in your game. Now, some people will go very heavy into this and they'll have entire rule systems set up for how to to let people know if there's something that's triggering you at the table. You know, they might have a card system or hand signals that they use, and people will use that as sort of safety nets. Some people will keep this very vague and just sort of like, I just want to give you guys some information about the world. Let's build your characters and ask me any questions. And it's just sort of like this free form Q&A that your players can have with you so that they get a better understanding of their characters. They get a better understanding of the world and the setting. And that way, that session 1, the very first session, then feels a little closer to home. They feel like they understand things a little better. Plus, you have had some rapport with them, especially if they're brand new to you, right? So that's why I would do session 0. But also, I think that session 0 is a great opportunity for you to give them a little bit of a test run. So for my session 0s, what I like to do is also run an actual session that maybe has none of the characters from session 1. These are usually standalone characters. I use this as a way for me to run maybe a 1 or 2 hour one shot that is quick, it's fun, it's energetic. They get a feel for the world, they get a feel for your style as a DM, and you get a feel for their style as players, and you can sort of get ahead of any problem. So if somebody's talking too much, if somebody's on their phone, if somebody is being a nuisance by trying to have their character walk off a cliff or kill somebody every 3 seconds, well, then you know that problem is going to be persistent because it popped up immediately, right? So great way for you to get ahead of those things and not have to worry about that at session 10 or session 100. So session 0 is very, very important. I think it's the most important thing you can do for a lot of reasons. I do it for all of my games. I highly suggest that you do it too. And there you go. Those are 9 things that I do before I ever run session 1. That's basically everything I do before I start a new campaign. Let me know if I forgot anything. Let me know what you do. How do you create your campaigns? Do you have a lot more prep? Do you do less prep? I'm very curious. Let me know in the comments down below. Real Jazeer says, Tobias is looking a bit green at 539. Is that normal? I don't know much about displacer kittens. I mean, I'm colorblind, so all displacer kittens look green to me. Probably, maybe. Noodle567 says, he's green now. Everybody is very concerned with the fact that he's green. Look, this is normal. It's Tobias. I don't know what you guys want. And Noah Rice 3362 says, I clearly missed something because our buddy is green now. Listen, guys, he's green. He's always been green. I don't know what you're talking about. Look, this is him now. This is him back in the day. It's the same picture. This is the same picture. Noah Rice says, I do find it very interesting how world building like that works and how being on a different type of celestial body can affect the climate. I have to wonder, though, what if there was like a shattered Earth? How might climate change in the case of something like that? Very cool video. As always, I like the map quite a bit too. And I agree. I think that thinking about those things is what sets your world apart. It's the thing that makes your world unique, right? Like in my case, I wanted to put my world on a moon, and instead of just assuming that the science worked exactly the same as it does on Earth, I did a little digging and ended up finding out some really cool information about how the science of that would work, which then informed the decisions I made for my world and the things that I decided to put into the world. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's great to consider things like that and think about things that you may not always think about. Use your brain, people. Critical thinking. Stop using ChatGPT. Now, if you were paying attention in today's video, leave a timestamp in the comments down below with where you saw our little green Tobias, and you might just get shouted out in the next video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Forge on, my friends. And remember, Tobias has always been green.